This used to be the most famous dish in all of London. New York has its pizza, France has its baguettes, but London has its jellied eels. I'm currently out front of Goddard's at Greenwich, one of the few remaining places in London that still serves one of London's most famous dishes, jellied eels. What used to be a working class staple of East London, with hundreds of places selling jellied eels across the East End, now there are only a handful of these places left. So what happened to jellied eels? Why is it that Londoners ate this food for generations and then all of a sudden stopped? My name is Evan Edinger, and today we're going to be diving into the strange rise and fall of jellied eels, and I'll be tasting it myself for the first time, and discovering why this dish didn't disappear just because people nowadays think it's gross, but for a reason that's much weirder and a lot more important. What killed this dish isn't what you think, and once you learn the real reason, you might be thankful it's off the menu. Jellied eels got their start in London cuisine in the 18th century. The River Thames and the River Lee were so teeming with eels that it was said that it would run the rivers black with the wriggling bodies of these young eels coming upstream. The sheer abundance of eels in London's rivers made them the de facto protein of London's poor. Anyone with a net could pretty much toss it in and haul in a huge amount of dinner for the evening. Yum! Or better yet, one could open a street food stall outside the local pub, making money selling your jellied eels. Or hot and stewed, they go both ways. The thing about eels, though, is that they're already quite a gelatinous meat. So when you chop up the chunks and cook them in a broth and let it set to cool, the broth actually congeals into essentially a, how do I say this? A fishy jelly, or for Americans watching, jello. Luckily, this jelly actually acts as a preservative which allows the eels to keep. So a poor working class Londoner from the olden days would be able to go have some delicious jellied eels. No, I'm a bit full. Put it in the fridge. Have some tomorrow. The only thing I can imagine that tastes worse than jellied eels? Day old jellied eels. But hey, I'll save that for later in the video when I get to try it. By the end of the 19th century, jellied eels had become fully entwined in the food culture of London's East End. While pie and mash shops were already popular throughout the city, they also started selling things like jellied eels, stewed eels, and eel pies. And I know the idea of jellied eels and eel pies might come off as a bit repulsive to those of you with more of a modern palate, but it was just their equivalent of a meal deal lunch. It was quick, it was cheap, and you could pretty much pick it up anywhere you were in East London. Even though much of the food supply was rationed during World War II, eels never made that list. So once again, eels became incredibly popular with London's working class for the length of the war. However, once the war ended, that's when things took a sudden turn for London's most famous dish. At the end of the war, London changed a lot. The city changed, people's tastes changed, even the eels changed. In the 50s and 60s, Britain became much more prosperous, and the people had access to a much wider variety of foods.
Yep, there's a lot of stuff to be bought now that nobody ever heard of 20 years ago, because so many citizens come from abroad, you see.
More exotic cuisines arrived with post-war immigration. Curry houses began opening up everywhere, Chinese takeaways became more common, and cheaper tinned foods like spaghetti hoops, the British version of SpaghettiOs, became a lot more readily available, and may I reiterate, also very cheap. What are you in the mood for today, honey? Oh, I don't know, are we in between jellied eels or a can of spaghetti hoops? I'm going for the hoops.
All I got is jellied eels and spaghetti hoops.
All right, I think the hoops for me then.
You never want the eels anymore, love. What happened to us? We used to be a country that stood for something.
I don't want to go through these hoops and pounds for you anymore, you wriggly little bitch.
What the f am I doing? What I'm trying to say is, there was a lot more new and exciting foods to eat. So eating jellied eels started to feel a bit more old-fashioned, like something your parents or grandparents might do. And with all the new food available to choose to eat, many people weren't really choosing to eat jellied eels. Wasn't really exactly on the top of that list. Not trying to knock the eels, but also, I kind of am, considering I just came back from Vietnam and the people there have such incredible cuisines that are all so incredibly cheap, and yet Britain went with jellied eels covered in chili vinegar. Ooh, cuisine. I remember our family used to eat the same dishes over and over and over when we didn't have much money. One of them I remember the most was beefaroni, and now as an adult I actively avoid it. Not that beefaroni's bad per se, it's just with all the choice I have, I'm not exactly reaching for the beefaroni. Also, yeah, beefaroni is actually that bad. It's like spaghetti hoops, but worse. But the same can be said about Brits after the war. Really, Jellied Eels was a reminder of struggle. Another nail in the coffin was London's dining habits. Remember how I mentioned that Jellied Eels would primarily be sold in stands outside of pubs? Well, this is the wildest fact that I learned when researching this video, but prior to the 1970s, pubs like the one behind me did not serve food. Sure, they might have sold some sarnie, some pork pies, and scratchings and snacks and such, but it wasn't really until the 70s they started selling things like burgers, fish and chips, curries, the era of the gastropub, if you will. I don't know why, but I always thought, oh, it's a pub, public house. They probably have like food like they serve in The Hobbit. That's what I thought. So the once thriving Jellied Eel stands that existed out front of many pubs in the East End started to lose their appeal. Why go outside of the pub to get some Jellied Eels when you could stay inside in the warmth and have things like burgers or curries? I mean, there's a lot more appetizing things inside than out. Plus, let me just show my modern bias here, but the idea of Jellied Eels sounds pretty gross if you've never heard of it. And I guess if you heard of it as well. And so with the gentrification of the East End, with many people exiting the area and many people entering, well, these new people in the East End weren't exactly gagging to try this item on the menu called Jellied Eels. And so the item began to fade. And by 1995, there were only 87 dedicated pie and mash shops left in London, down from the 100+ decades earlier. I'd still say that's quite a lot, but here we are in 2025 and there's only a small handful left. I guess I've been making a bit of a habit recently of trying foods that most people would avoid. Because just the other day I uploaded a video trying the durian, Southeast Asia's most infamous fruit. I'll link that above if you haven't seen it yet. I feel like most of my friends would be more inclined to try a stinky fruit than a bowl of wiggly fish jello. Here we are inside of Goddard's at Greenwich. I ordered the Jellied Eels, a pie and mash. This is still the same recipe that they've been making since 1890, so this is as traditional as you can get. I'm gonna be honest, it doesn't look that appealing to me, but I'm very excited to give it a go. It smells like the sea. Also, I was informed that there's a bone inside, so I have to avoid this bone in the middle. You know what? It tastes like comfort food. It actually tastes pretty good. It does. The idea is bizarre. The wiggly jelly bits. Let's just try some of that. It's like if you took soup and you turned it into jelly. It feels a bit wrong. It's not bad. It's just strange. It's very salty. They also have it stewed, but I wanted to try the jellied one because that's the one that sounds the most bizarre to me. I think the idea of Jellied Eels is worse than the actual, like, food, the actual item, because it's actually not half bad. But now the big question, do I think you should try it? Maybe. But also, do I think that Jellied Eels have the chance of making a comeback? Well, funny thing is, someone already tried. Back in 2013, UK supermarket behemoth Tesco began stocking Jellied Eels, not just in London, but in the entirety of the UK. And for a moment, it worked. Sales went up by 35% as people leaned into the nostalgia. And as of the recording of this video, it looks like you can still go to your local Tesco and pick up a tub of Jellied Eels for a little over £3. But before you go rushing off to buy yourself a tub, there's something you should probably know. Because even if everybody decided they wanted to buy Jellied Eels again, they were on trend, there's some sort of TikTok dance, people are pretending they're eels, and you want to buy more Jellied Eels. Well, soon enough, even if you want to, you probably won't be able to, because the fish behind this dish has been disappearing quietly, fast. The European eel, the sole species that this recipe depends on, has seen its population drop by 98% since 1980. That's a real problem. In 2008, the IUCN, or International Union for Conservation of Nature, placed the European eel on its list of critically endangered animals. And it might make you think, well, how could this be with the decreasing popularity of jellied eels? Well, it's a bit multifaceted. First off, did you know that there exists a sea that's not bordered by any landmass, but rather just water? Well, you've got the Mediterranean, which is bordered by Europe and Africa. You've got the South China Sea, which is bordered by the Philippines, Vietnam, and China. But then you've got the only one of its kind, the Sargasso Sea, who's bordered with just the Atlantic Ocean. This part of the Atlantic Ocean is bounded not by land, but by 4 distinct currents that form an ocean gyre, or a sort of spinning vortex, which results in unbelievably clear water with an underwater visibility of 60 meters. That's the Sargasso Sea. Why do I bring this up? Well, the Sargasso Sea is the birthplace of the European eel. The European eel has an absolutely fascinating life cycle. They start their life via eggs in the Sargasso Sea, or so we think. Nobody's actually ever seen them spawn there, but this is where scientists most likely believe that they're all coming from. Their respawn point, if you will. I think that's one of the most interesting things about this. We actually don't know that much about eels, as much as we'd like to know. Sargasso Sea is massive, and these eels don't do it above water. They're doing it downstairs, and it's such a massive amount of land. How are you supposed to find these eels? I don't know. It's a really bad problem. First, they get spawned in the Sargasso Sea. Then, their eggs are carried by the currents of the Atlantic Ocean over the course of 1 to 2 years until they eventually reach Europe, by which point they've grown to glass eels. Then, they swim up the waterways throughout Europe, such as the Thames behind me, looking for a nice habitat and food to grow, as they turn into elvers, just basically a juvenile eel. Throughout the next couple years of living in the rivers and waterways, they then grow into what is called a yellow eel. Eventually, they grow to the size of being called silver eels, and then they make their way back 6,500 kilometers to the Sargasso Sea to become white eels, lay their spawn, and the whole process begins anew. But thanks to climate change, pollution, damming of rivers, habitat destruction, and illegal trafficking, fewer and fewer of these eels are making it back. Now, I'm sure you've heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the big old patch of microplastics and such that's just floating in the Pacific Ocean. Sad to tell you, but there also exists one in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, smack dab in the middle of the Sargasso Sea, where the eels breed. But even if the eels make it to Europe from the Sargasso Sea, there are huge efforts to catch them before they do, both legally and illegally. In fact, eels are one of the most highly trafficked animals on the planet, up there with pangolins and rhinoceroses. Each and every year, it's estimated that 350 million elvers and glass eels, aka the juvenile form of these eels, are being caught, smuggled, and taken to Asia, where they're considered a delicacy. At least they appreciate them over there, I guess. We're eating them for God knows what reason. Those that survive the journey and enter the river system then have to fight against the overwhelming amount of dams, locks, sluices, and weirs that prevent the system from being a continuous flow to get them to where they need to go. This is why infrastructure like fish ladders and eel ladders are such an important part of our man-made water system. If you haven't seen it yet, Brady from Practical Engineering made a really excellent video showing how they work. I'll link that above. So pollution, illegal fishing, and man-made blockages does seem pretty bad, but hardly enough to wipe out 98% of the eel population, right? Well, that's because we're missing one last piece of the puzzle. In the 1980s, a parasitic nematode worm was introduced to the European eel population. This parasite was common in Japanese eel populations, which had grown resistant to it. But through some sort of human activity in the 1980s, this parasite found its way over to the European eel population from Taiwan. From there, the nematode infects the eel's swim bladder, which is vital for its buoyancy. As the worm grows within the eel's swim bladder, the eel's efficiency at swimming decreases drastically. Those eels need as much energy as they can get to make their 6,500 kilometer commute back to the Sargasso Sea to spawn. Any little bit less energy, they're not going there and they're not making any more babies. To make matters worse, scientists have recently discovered that this same nematode over the last 30 years has actually adapted to infect the European eels even more so than they were able to do in the Japanese eels, reproducing more effectively within the swim bladders, and yeah, it's just really not a good time to be a European eel right now. Scientists are currently working on a way to deal with this parasite, but they're struggling because they have not yet found a way of breeding eels within captivity. Eels so far only seem to ever spawn in the Sargasso Sea, so things are not looking very good. There is a current research team in the Netherlands, north of Amsterdam, somewhere near Gouda. I'm great at Dutch, but as of recording this video, it's still just not looking good. I'm sorry, all right? Gouda forbid I make a mistake. But while scientists have been trying their best to solve that problem, there also exist many great charities that work in the Thames estuary trying to find the problems that we can solve to help the eels. In 2019, the Thames European Eel Project, or TEEP, ran a test just west of London, ironically in the area right next to Eel Pie Island. They planned to catch, count, and return any European eels they find in the waterway. Their results were horrifying. Over the course of 150 days, can you guess how many eels they found? Single digits, 9 eels, which is so drastically low considering that a couple decades in the past, the rivers were black with their wriggling bodies. And yet, here in London, they're still sold, just about. But because of its endangered status, the European eel can't be exported outside the UK and EU, which begs the question, if a traditional dish relies on a critically endangered animal, should we still be eating it? Yes, the dish was really popular when eels were abundant, but times have changed. They're not here anymore. And I've seen many people online state so matter-of-factly that eating jellied eels is fine because they're eating farmed jellied eels, not taken from the wild. They've got drawers upon drawers of these fresh farmed eels at the market stalls. But that's not exactly true, because farmed eels aren't farmed the way most people would think. They're not bred in tanks like salmon or tilapia. Instead, almost all eel farming still relies on capturing the eels in the wild when they have just reached Europe's shores from their long migration from the Sargasso Sea, and they're still in their juvenile glass eel stage. These glass eels are then raised in captivity until they're large enough to sell. So yes, they're grown on eel farms, but only after being taken from the wild in the first place. And as the European eel is now critically endangered, this practice will continue to place enormous pressure on their population. Some people have actually suggested that we protect jellied eels in the same way that we protect champagne. You know, a cultural product that's tied to a specific region or process. But there is one key difference here. Champagne doesn't face extinction, no matter how much wine the French drink. So I feel like it doesn't really make sense to protect jellied eels over protecting the eels themselves. Whether or not jellied eels actually make a comeback is kind of beside the point, because without the eels, there is no comeback. So the truth is, jellied eels as a dish has fallen out of fashion, with most people now living in East London, and I find it incredibly convenient that modern Western opinions on the dish are that it sounds pretty gross. Because as much as I can appreciate the culinary history of this dish that fed London for so long, I think maybe we should allow this historic dish to pass on into the history books, at least for the time being. If you're interested in volunteering some of your time or money to aid in the restoration of the nature and rivers around London, I'll drop a link in the description below to Thames 21, who are a local charity who work with communities to help restore the vital waterways that the European eel needs to survive. Other than that, I hope you learned something today, and hopefully you come back to my YouTube channel next Sunday to learn something new. Or if you haven't seen it yet and you want to learn about Asia's most controversial fruit, I tried the durian and give you a little history lesson on that, so click that link to watch that video above. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you there. Goodbye. I'm so happy. I love my job. There is a swan beelining it for me right now, and I am concerned for my health. Oh, yeah, you turn back. I love being able to find these compositions and then cycle here. It's a bit shit about the eel though, right? Let's provide some context. He can't be so happy. He's happy he gets to educate.